Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on December 23, 2025. It is day 1,399 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are back with pre-Christmas maps and quick updates from Pokrovsk, from Kupiansk, and a look at how the Ukrainians are doing with air defense, given the massive terror attacks that Russia launched last night, may well launch again tonight, and right through Christmas. And Chuck, it's good to be back with you.
Yep, good to be back, Alan, and happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas to those who are Christmasing, and happy holidays to everyone else.
Well, there are no happy holidays in Pokrovsk, and this actually is true whether you're a Ukrainian or a Russian. This is probably one of the grimmest places on the zero line, but it still favors Ukraine's strategy and tactics. What's the latest from Pokrovsk, Chuck?
Yeah, so we've got the 1450 UTC map, which we put up today, and you can see we have the areas in red, which are pretty much Russian dominated, and I don't want to say dominated because the zero line is permeable in many places. You can see some Ukrainian attacks took place south of the M30 highway in urban Pokrovsk. There are contacts as well in the urban area, which is sort of the locus of conflict. Then in the suburban areas, and a new word I learned, the peri-urban areas, just areas on the periphery of the cities. We found in a lot of cities in Ukraine, you'll be driving through them and they suddenly just stop, right? So you're out in the country all of a sudden. Pokrovsk is no different. We will have some individual contacts to talk about in a minute, and they show this fact. I'm not going to say trend anymore, a fact that Russian generals just don't seem to be able to wrap their head around, Alan. But to frame this and the coming maps, this is the largest battle of the 21st century. This is a battle of which the scale of Russian losses are comparable to many battles in the Second World War, major battles. And this is not yet casualties at the rate of Stalingrad, but it is fully 50% of those casualties now.
Absolutely incredible. British intelligence today released a report about Russian casualties in 2025, and here we are pretty much at year end, and British intelligence says more than 400,000 Russian casualties in 2025 alone. So that's more than 1,000 a day. That really has become the barometer to measure Russian frustration. 1,000 casualties a day. British intelligence suggesting actually it has gone over 400,000 killed and wounded. And that has brought total Russian casualties in this war to over 1.1 million. And with so many, yes, occurring here in Pokrovsk in 2025, after what happened in Bakhmut in 2023, 2024.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And one thing the Russians haven't been able to wrap their head around is the larger the tactical element they send into contact with Ukraine, the more rapidly it is defeated and the more staggering the casualties are. So in the last 72, 85 hours, there have been 3 Russian assaults broken up by Ukraine. And the one that happened yesterday, the Russians lost 8 tanks, 18 infantry fighting vehicles, and 11 motorcycles. And I'm sure that's not counting the donkeys, quad bikes, horses. But I just want to put this in perspective. If the United States had an element that where we lost, 8 tanks, 18 Bradleys, I mean, you can't even conceive of that. It just is and that is a routine loss for this big an assault force, Alan, as you know.
Yeah. Well, the Ukrainian commanders on the ground in Minorod were saying today in a briefing that was released by the Ministry of Defense that their defense of Minorod is based on making the access routes that the Russians are taking into this sister city of Pokrovsk. Everything is aimed at those access routes that the Russians favor. I mean, are the Ukrainians funneling them in one direction and making that route an absolute kill zone?
Yeah, I think they're looking at the maps and they're looking at what we call the threat axes, right? So that's most often the direct route between you and the enemy is one of the primary threat axes. And again, it depends on if you're in a redwood forest and there's only one road, that's probably where they're going to come through. But again, you got to cover all your bases. But big problems for the Russians. They can't operate at night. They don't have forces that are capable of conducting maneuvers at night. So I don't know the exact time of this recent blowout, but judging from the median contact reports, it probably happened at 10:30 in the morning. Right? This isn't strike at dawn. This is it's really something amazing. But about the time the Bakhmut battle started, I mean, everything kind of changed. Remember, and even during the Battle of Bakhmut, drones became ubiquitous on the battlefield, and the Russians paid for it. And you're right to bring up Bakhmut in comparison. Look, they lost 150,000 people taking Bakhmut, and they've already lost twice that, 250,000, just in Pokrovsk, which is why we put it up there with a major World War II battle.
And you look at this map from 23 December, which is today. I'm looking at 1450 UTC, 23 December. No significant advances anywhere in the urban area by Russia. And what you might characterize as a surprise Ukrainian counterattack, to the south west down along the rail track and the TO506. I don't think the Russians expected to see a Ukrainian counterattack that far outside the city, did they?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's a question of making sure that the Russians have got to divert some of their resources to defensive fighting. So, the money shot of this is the distance between Rodinsky and Pokrovsk. If the Russians want to take Minor Hard, they've got to seize that area, and we've got it listed now as a zone of occasional contact, meaning anybody can run into anybody in that area. And there are red, it's tinted red, but by no means do the Russians control that area, right? And they're going to have to do that if they want to take Pokrovsk. And another town that is really, really important is to the northwest of Pokrovsk, Hershene. That's also the money shot. We talked about how the little town of Chasiv Yar was the key to Bakhmut. The key to Pokrovsk is Hershene. But when you look around there, you see all that open terrain, Alan, and you and I know exactly how deadly that terrain is.
Absolutely deadly, especially in the wintertime. And it was just a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, that the Russians attempted an armored column assault on Hershene, a solo attack. In other words, there was no support coming out of Rodinsky, for example, even though that would be a hell of a long way for a mechanized column to go from Rodinsky all the way to that little town, Hershene. But a solo attack doesn't do much for you either.
No, and there's always the question of let's say six tanks and whatever 15 APCs made it to Hershene, which I mean, look, that's not going to happen. You've got them there, and now you've got to supply them. Now, there's a lot of drone traffic that are supporting isolated Russian units, and the Ukrainians are also supplied by drones. But you're not going to be able to feed an infantry fighting vehicle or a main battle tank with drones. I mean, one tank round weighs more than almost any. There are drones that can carry that, but there's much better uses for that flight time. So the Russians are really, I've been extending my subscriber brief, and I'm projecting that, look, there's not going to be any big changes until early in the new year. And today I wrote the words Q1.
Yeah.
So, that's really where I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. Well, in your updated analysis or for subscribers, Chuck, on Twitter, you said that any Russian gains were tactical and costly. Talk about those two key words: tactical gains at an incredibly high cost for the Russians. What does that mean?
Yeah, what it basically means is it's a bad application of resources. So, and this is basically the math. I have 100 guys. Now, I'm not maneuvering them. That would basically be, that would be a company, basically. 90 guys as a company around, plus a headquarters element, et cetera. So I got 100 guys. Now, the Russians are not maneuvering that in 2 fire platoons and a weapons platoon and a headquarters element, a la Band of Brothers, where you watched a company of paratroopers put on a clinic as light infantry. The Russians are going to send those guys in 2s and 5s and 8s, and about 20 of that 100 are going to make it to some shot-up building in Pokrovsk, where they're going to burn through their water on day 1. They're all going to be out of freaking water, and on day 3 they're going to be out of ammunition. Okay, so there's a tactical gain. Hey, I'm in the Walmart on Magubis Street. Groovy, right? Okay, and look, these guys. One of the reasons paratroopers are so well trained is, they're going to land scattered all over the God's green earth, and they are trained so well, so they link up and they can go, "You're the sergeant, I'm a 60 gunner. Let's go."
Yeah, and the Russians can't do that. I mean, we could go back a couple of days ago to that map that shows the mechanized strike up against Tershine. That was clearly what the Russians had in mind. They get to this little farm village, and they get a few guys into a barn, let's say, and then they are hoped to be reinforced the next day. Actually, they they are all but left for dead. The Ukrainians know where they are. The Ukrainians know how few they are, how difficult it is to supply them, and the Ukrainians will take them out at a time they choose to.
Yeah, and it's it's taken me a long time to wrap my head around Russian tactics, because it goes against everything I have ever trained, every way I've been trained to look at tactical problems. How much I valued my own operators, and I wouldn't throw, and there's a certain point in the SEAL teams where you get to have enough of an operational reputation that you could say no to stupid ops. You can say, okay, well, what happens if, and are you really going to take my guys and we're going to go to Hershene, and then what?
Yeah.
Right. So nobody in the Russian army thinks that way, which is why their casualties are above 250,000 just here.
Right. Yeah, and it's why they go up by 1,000 or more every single day. The other thing I'm sure the Ukrainians are doing, and you often talk about this, Chuck, let the Russians make these tactical advances. Let them take a field. Let them get to that tree line. Let them get three or four guys into that barn, uh, almost as bait. And because the Ukrainians know the Russians have to resupply those four guys and reinforce them with four more guys. This is how Russia uses that infiltration, penetration tactic that has been successful here in Pokrovsk, that they tried in Kupiansk with less success, and that they're now trying in Kostyantynivka also with less success. But once you get to that barn, you are the Ukrainians are going to just let you stay there as bait for the rest of the Russians trying to come up and join you, right?
Well, remember a couple of months ago, the pearl clutching, oh my God, the massive breakthrough of the Russian army, and everyone was all a dither. And, Alan says, well, they're going north and Pokrovsk is to the south. And Ukraine was delighted to let those guys go up there. And they slowly encircled those people into two pockets and they crushed them. Because, here was the other thing. The Russians actually made several attempts to break through and get to those pockets, which all failed. Just every time they put together 8 tanks and 15 IFVs up there, they got hosed. And then the Russians were diverting a lot of their drone traffic up there to resupply these guys. And I'll also point out to our Russian listening guests, if I want to know where the Vatniks are, I just sit there and look. I can hear the drone coming over and I can see where it landed. And then all I got to do is wake up the mortar guys. Okay. So, again, Alan, all of this stuff is such staggering stupidity.
Well, it is. It also actually shows how important words are. I mean, so many people, when they saw what was happening up in Dobropilia, which is off the map here, but it cuts across the M32 off to the east northeast here. Some military analysts use the word breakthrough, a Russian breakthrough of Ukrainian defensive lines. And, as you saw the action develop, you had to scratch your head. A breakthrough always means that your opponent has follow-up forces. There were no Russian follow-up forces whatsoever.
Well, and, we'll put this on the table and let everyone see this battle for what it is. Since the Russians took Avdiivka, and including the fight for Avdiivka, which literally was a slag heap, literally a 180-foot tall slag heap, the Russians have lost 5 times the number of people that the United States lost in all of the Vietnam War. 5 times the people. And they still haven't taken Pokrovsk.
No.
So which is why the maps for Pokrovsk, they are troll magnets. It is so important for them to convince people that, look, it's going well in Pokrovsk. There's this proves that we're going to dominate Ukraine. It proves exactly the opposite.
Yeah. It does prove the opposite. I also think it goes to show that any Russian commanders up towards Rodinsky and any Russian commanders in the center of Pokrovsk or to the south of the rail line that essentially divides Pokrovsk north and south, they're not in contact with one another, and they are not working together in any comprehensive way.
No, not in the least bit. And again, look, we have a zero-sum game going between these Russian generals. So we often talk about the top of the mitten, which is the fingers north going toward Rodinsky, and the south, the thumb that is trying to hold on to Pokrovsk. Look, these guys are playing against each other, right? And they don't play nice. So they are actually in competition for resources. And North General doesn't want to see South General succeed, and vice versa. And that's the thought process. So you can imagine how poorly they coordinate their operations, right? Look, and the other thing is, we see these, what used to be tactically relevant. If I put together a task element that had 8 main battle tanks and 14 infantry fighting vehicles, I expect it to sweep everything before it and reach its objective and tell me mission accomplished, send the reinforcements. But every time Russia does that, they get smoked. And warfare, ground warfare, maneuver warfare doctrine is changing. It hasn't come to its resting point yet, because the whole world and every military in the world is trying to figure out what does ground maneuver warfare look like in the age of drones. But the Soviet doctrine was exactly that: armored breakthrough exploited by motor rifle troops, and that just doesn't work in this war.
No, it actually it's part of the question we'll be answering in the next show. No one knows what combined maneuver warfare looks like in 2025, 2026, in the era of drone warfare. And that era is still changing. I mean, there are new drone tactics. There are new drone designs. There is a drone future that has yet to be imagined, and it's going to change the nature of war next week, next month, next year, and next decade.
Yeah, and I'll remind everyone, look, I'm a naval officer, and I don't know what it's going to look like going forward, but the tank is not irrelevant. It's not going to be irrelevant. If anything, it reinforces what I was always taught. The war starts in outer space. Then it comes into the stratosphere. Then it comes into controlling your airspace. Then among that all else, the invisible war of electronic warfare goes on. And we have seen the democratization of that. And I've said this many times. It used to be aircraft carriers and division level forces that worry about electronic warfare. Now it's a rifle squad. Now it's a fire team. It's one vehicle.
It is amazing. It's one vehicle, and you probably want to be in that vehicle, as a matter of fact.
Yep. And Alan and I forego electronic warfare because we didn't want to have the antennas.
Exactly. We talked about it, and Rostig knew what he was doing. So we can leave the Pokrovsk map here for the moment and come back to it in a couple of days, probably sometime after Christmas. But you can see, and we'll do some map comparisons over the last few days. The situation just isn't good for the Russians in Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians have them in their sights, no matter which direction the Russians attempt to go.
Yeah, it is. And again, there's one more thing to remember environmentally. So there are always advantages to being on the defense, and we've said that. And it even goes into an alley, right? You got one guy in an alley, you want to take him out. Well, you don't want one other guy. You want 5 guys, right? You want to grab each arm and leg, and somebody pummels him while you got every arm and leg. It's interesting that the basic casualty ratio is about 1 Ukrainian casualty for every 5 Russian casualties, but that is a median. For example, there were no Ukrainian casualties when they wiped out those 8 tanks and 15 IFVs. So there's another thing, because in my day, you had to get a rocket or an anti-tank guided missile, and that's how we hit tanks. And it sounds crazy, but I always thought I had an advantage fighting a tank because they could only look through here. And again, their sensors weren't as good in my day, but I could always get around to the back of them and screw them up. Even an unguided rocket, an AT-4, which is actually a pretty good piece of gear, or a Carl Gustaf. But so the casualties aren't always the same. And, I want this to register with everybody. 5 times the U.S. casualties in 10 years of war in Vietnam, and they haven't taken one city.
Yeah.
Okay. it's already a W for the Ukrainians, and unfortunately, there is like nothing left of Pokrovsk.
Absolutely nothing left of Pokrovsk. And Pokrovsk, by the way, is a much smaller place than Bakhmut. As much destruction as we saw in Bakhmut, there's more left standing in Bakhmut or in the rear of Bakhmut, like Soledar, which is a particularly good place to have, actually, if you're a Russian or a Ukrainian. Soledar is a well-developed area of salt mines. But in other words, there's more left in Bakhmut that the Russians would find useful than exists any longer in Pokrovsk. Let the Russians take Pokrovsk. What use will it be of them? Next to none.
Yeah, next to nothing. And it isn't like, and there never has been a battle in this war so far for a key position, right? There's been no battle for Atlanta, right? In Atlanta in the American Civil War, it was a communications nexus, and whoever had it had access to all 5 railroads, et cetera, et cetera. There has not been a single battle for any place like that. And simply because of the geography and topography and highway layout of Eastern Ukraine.
I think you're right. I mean, in a way, the most significant battle took place when the Ukrainians saved Kyiv at the beginning of the war. But that still was not the battle for Atlanta,
No, it definitely wasn't. And, I'm always one of those guys, war doesn't end when you capture the guy's, flag and his, because I will point out to the Americans, we won the War of 1812, but they burned Washington.
Right.
But thereafter came the stand at Fort McHenry. So, but it would have been an incredibly symbolic target. And, I want to remind everyone else that Ukraine defeated the absolute best that Russia had. VDV forces, their guards, armored units, and they were, I can remember when Hostomel was taken back and the massacre at Bucha, those Russian troops, they did not retire over the border into Belarus. They ran away. They were stealing civilian cars. They were utterly destroyed as a military unit.
Yeah. And taking off their uniforms.
And taking off. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, we'll be talking a little bit later about what to expect in the case of Russian reversals on the battlefield.
Yeah. I suppose we could talk a little bit about Mariupol and Tokmak and Melitopol and the city of Kherson, which Ukraine, of course, liberated. Kherson is the only oblast capital that Russia occupied at any point in this war, and Ukraine has liberated Kherson, although Kherson unfortunately remains in that big kill zone. Russia shells it every single day and runs the human safari against Kherson's civilians every single day as well. So, but we're going to leave Pokrovsk and move to Kupiansk, which is a whole other story. And it is the story of Ukraine putting Russians on the run, but being very careful how they follow that up.
Yeah, so this is a place that, and I've noticed a little ripple in the force of the information war. And when I say information war, I include, established Western media as well, right? I always think, and we always say, who's telling me this and what do they want me to believe? So there's this ripple coming through where Western media is saying, Putin's generals have been lying to him and he doesn't really, okay, you're making an excuse for the dictator. What dictator in the world has not gotten lied to by his generals, including the guy with a funny mustache, right? And Kupiansk is the absolute sine qua non embodiment of those lies. His generals have told him that Kupiansk was simultaneously under Russian control, and they had surrounded 14 Ukrainian battalions in the city. Well, we're looking at the map right now. You tell me where you put 14 battalions in that place, right? So I can't believe that Putin could not figure that one out. But as we can see from the map, there are just two encircled positions that the Russians are in. They're a little position in the center of downtown, straddling the EP79 highway, and then a little band that is south of the H26, right by the junction. You can see if you look closely at those little arrows, the contacts are Russian units trying to break out, right? Breaking out with like your last half a magazine, it isn't going to work out for you.
Yeah.
And it isn't, as we can see from this map.
So the Ukrainians have estimated somewhere between 100 and 140 Russian soldiers in these two pockets in Kupiansk. I was interested to learn how Ukraine makes such an estimate, and it's by picking up radio traffic. So there are about 40 call signals in the radio traffic that Ukraine has intercepted, and they estimate 3 or 4 guys per radio. So that's how they come up with, somewhere between 100, 120 odd Russians in these two pockets. Just, for those who are curious about making such an estimate, that's how Ukraine did it in this case.
Yeah, and these guys are using Walmart radios in a lot of cases. They're broadcasting N clear, meaning no encryption. And usually in every war, you've got a language differential. However, in this war, most Ukrainians, in fact, almost all the ones we met, they speak Russian and English as well as Ukrainian with equal fluency in all of them. So it isn't like me trying to parse out what's going on in an Arab broadcast because I just turn to my Terp and go, what did he say? Like a complete idiot. But and the thing is, with that kind of like real-time, solid battlefield intelligence, and to our Russian listening guests, every time you break squelch and speak on the radio, you are direction found in seconds. Microseconds. They know what floor you're on, what side of the building you're on, and everything else. So think about that tonight. And your choices are really do what Uncle Chuck says or do without comms, and either one is not going to help you any.
No. And, the Russian-Ukrainian language street is not a two-way street. Ukrainians understand Russian. Russians do not understand Ukrainian. You might ask yourself, why is that? It's because Ukraine suffered for so long under Russian control. So to make any progress in a career or in school or in life, all Ukrainians had to speak Russian. That was the official language of the Soviet Union. All Ukrainians did speak Russian. But the Ukrainian language survived, and today it's flourishing, but it is not a language many Russians understand. So it's a small but significant advantage the Ukrainians have. It's almost like knowing the terrain because this is where you grew up, right?
Absolutely. And every little thing on the battlefield, and a great way to visualize this is even a hill that's 10 feet tall. That seems like nothing. That's an advantage. So you just accumulate these little sort of 0.5% advantages, and the language is real-time translation of your enemy's radio traffic. Look, that's golden, because now you've got a squad leader who can execute on that now.
Right.
I hear back, look, they're on the 4th floor of the bank building on the west side. Bang, here comes a drone. So, and that's how fast the kill chain is in that particular incident. So the guy gets off the radio, 5 seconds later, I'm getting I heard him.
Right.
Now I have to fix.
Right. So, how fast and how far are the Russians going to run from Kupiansk, Chuck?
I need to pull up. I had a much larger scale map of Kupiansk, and I'll put that up for context here in the next couple of days, because here we are looking just at the city. But again, we've got one of those kind of mittens with no sort of thumb coming up around Kupiansk. One of the things that the Russians have to do, and we talk about interior and exterior lines of communication, the Ukrainians are inside the barn. The Russians, everything the Russians are putting in and did put in to the Battle of Kupiansk had to come all the way around from the north and then into Kupiansk. So the threat vector, the Russians picked this, and the terrain dictated a little bit, came in from the north. And, as Alan and I pointed out, even when the Russians were in occupation of Kupiansk, we pointed out there's two sides of the city. There's the Oskil River Valley between the two of them. The western bank is sort of a city on a hill, but the Russians never entered eastern Kupiansk. So that was always going to be a problem. And look, it was, but this thing was won because of the little post up there in Ravdivka to the north. You look at that everywhere that is white, and folks, and if you look in, you can see the contour lines here. The Russians had to come out of the woods across those fields, and this battle was basically won by Ukraine cutting off the logistics of the occupying troops and withering them on the vine.
And as a matter of fact, you can go all the way back to Chuck's map from December 4 and see that interdiction start on 4 December. I regard this as a magnificent map of yours, Chuck, because there's a lot of action in it, especially a lot of Ukrainian drones, but you can also see the huge disadvantage that the Russian troops are at in this open, barren land around Radivka, and really that stretches all the way from Radivka to Holyabivka. It's just barren land with no cover whatsoever.
Yeah, and the Russians have been pushed out of a really large area. They had kind of a two-pronged occupation on either side of the M79 into Pokrovsk, but they had established control as far west as Merne. So, this was an ass kicking. And again, I can't remember the guy's name because he's no longer answering his phone, but someone was made a hero of Russia for conquering Kupiansk. And, within 24 hours, they were ejected from the city.
So wouldn't you think Putin back in the Kremlin is saying to himself, they lied to me about Kupiansk. Where else on the zero line are they lying to me? Are they lying to me about Pokrovsk? Are they lying to me about Kostyantynivka? Are they lying to me about Sumy? You'd think he would be asking these questions.
You'd think so, but there's, and again, and we've talked about this. Look, he has raised in 20 years a generation in the military. Guys started out as lieutenants under Putin, and now they're colonels. And if you were a captain when Putin got in, now you're a major general. None of these guys got promoted on merit. Not a single one of them. They're in the military surplus sales business, right? They sell their equipment. It's a big corrupt organization. And we've commented again and again, the ineptitude and the malpractice of these people as military field commanders is absolutely stunning. But there was something that happened during the Wagner mutiny, and it forced Putin to embrace Shoigu and Gerasimov. Now, Shoigu got shown the door eventually, but Gerasimov is no General Grant. And, who else can Putin turn to? Here's the other thing about Putin's system. There were no stars to rise to the top, right? There were no bright young field commanders who deserved to be colonels and then brigadiers. And I'll tell you what, it breaks my heart to see cadets taken out of Russian military academies at 18 and 19 years old before they've even matriculated, and they get gobbled up as platoon leaders, and they are killed. The number one rank that's going to get killed on a battlefield is a second lieutenant. That's who gets smoked, right? Which young ensigns should always remember.
One of the officer ranks that have been decimated in Russia, the rank of colonel, so much so that a lot of them refer to this as the colonel's war. Colonels are at the front, and Ukrainians are killing them by the dozens.
Yeah, the colonel shouldn't be at the front, right? The colonel is the next rank is general, right? Colonels are really, they should be in the rear with the gear and the beer. They should be commanding these outfits. And, we've also seen the micromanagerial legacy of the Soviet military, where there wasn't just a field commander, he had a zampolit, right? He had a political officer breathing down his neck. And there isn't zampolits per se anymore, but look, these colonels are far forward because they can't count on anything getting done, right? Because people are effing incompetent. So incompetent leaders, that's an insoluble problem for Russia. And, as we used to talk with John Spencer back in the Bakhmut days, they've entered this training death loop, right? Signing up in Moscow, getting on a bus in 4 days and being in Ukraine does not make you a soldier.
No. And that is what Russia is doing. Russia has its own manpower problem. We're going to talk about that in a little greater detail in a couple of days. But, so no, there are no political officers in Kupiansk with Russian forces. But don't you think that Putin has probably sprinkled a number of FSB officers and agents throughout the Russian command? And I believe the FSB was given the responsibility of protecting border crossings, so that, for example, there's a large contingent of FSB in Kursk and in Belgorod.
Yeah, and Jason Smart, who is our colleague, fellow Kyiv Post correspondent to Alan and I, whose PhD he took in the Russian language. Okay, so he's a basic dummy. He has explained to me that the FSB and the Army absolutely hate each other. Right? They compete for resources, they compete for the attention of the Tsar, etc. But there is no doubt that Putin trusts no one, and there is no doubt that he has informers in both camps. But I think he feels no threat from the FSB.
Yeah.
But he is going to increasingly realize, I don't know when he's going to realize this, but look, the Army is not delivering the mail in Ukraine. And I am. Unfortunately, I'm still a long war guy, but listen, I'll eat my hat and 3 tacos live on air if the Russians ever get to the Dnipro River, and that's never going to happen.
I don't think it is either, but I'm not going to take that bet, Chuck, because I don't want to see you eat 3 tacos. I've seen you eat 2 hamburgers. That was enough for me.
Oh, Rostek ate my other one.
So we're going to leave the ground war for the moment. We're going to leave Pokrovsk and leave Kupiansk and take a look at Ukraine's air defense, especially how Ukraine has been using F-16s in the role of air defense. Now, just last night, Russia unleashed an ungodly attack all across Ukraine. launching more than 35 ballistic and cruise missiles and more than 650 drones of all kinds, so that basically all of Ukraine was under air raid alert for more than 10 hours in Kyiv and in Lviv. The attack went on into the very dawn hours of the morning, right up until I think there was an air raid alert in Kyiv at 10 a.m. This morning. So F-16s in the role of air defense. Let's talk about that for a moment. Really successful night for F-16s and the rest of Ukrainian air defense.
Yeah, I think this may have been one of the most effective nights for the F-16. And the dynamic is there the F-16 armed with Sparrows, AMRAAMs, very good quality missiles. Of course, the F-16 is one of the most widely used fighter planes in the entire world. It's a hot rod. We've had some videos showing a KH-101 cruise missile pass over a town with an F-16 right behind it. And believe me, he had that missile locked up. So what is it that makes these F-16s more effective? Ukraine does not have the kind of tools that the United States would use to run an air battle, right? And that would be an AWACS type aircraft that can see everything and coordinate fighters. But what Ukraine does have is they have ASC 890 Swedish AWACS planes. They're twin engine turboprops. They have instead of a saucer on top, they've got this big bar. So it rectilinearly projects its radar. But it's a very, very competent system on par with the E-2 Hawkeye, which the United States flies for carrier airborne warning and fighter control. So this Swedish aircraft is up there, and it is seeing every KH-101 that's coming in. And there are basically, and of course it can work a lot of different ways. This is what I learned at Joint Staff. I'm not an air guy, but there are patrol boxes. And you talk to Patrol Box A, and you give him vectors, firing solutions on this incoming KH-101 or caliber, whatever it is. But last night, Ukraine shot down 98% of the incoming cruise missiles. That's exceptional. They've had 100% nights before, but more often that number is around 80. And of the shaheeds that Putin pays so much money to Iran for, they get shot down anywhere between 80 and 90, even 100% some nights. But the problem is that they're flooding the zone. And we know the kind of targets they hit, Alan, and unfortunately they are apartment buildings, they're hospitals, they're power stations, and 1 or 2 or 3 5% of these things get through, and they create random tragedy.
Yeah, and that's really all it takes. Say 10 drones out of 600 get through. They're going to do some damage, and especially in the wintertime, actually. It is harder to fight the fires that the drones might set in residential areas. These drones are increasingly armed with highly incendiary material, so that the fires they set burn hotter and faster. They're more destructive. And yes, Russia has launched so many terror attacks this late fall and early winter. They have succeeded in plunging Ukraine into the cold and dark. I mean, you were talking to folks in Kyiv the other day. They had 3 hours of electricity that day, I think. Odessa hasn't had electricity for 10 days.
Yeah, he was talking to my boss at the Kyiv Post, and look, she was saying, look, times are times are tough.
Yeah.
You
The
know.
same in Lviv.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lviv, that breaks my heart because I tell you what, I think that's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been in my entire life. I
Yeah.
am absolutely hooked on Lviv. I'd rather be in Lviv than Paris. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Chuck. Yeah. Yeah. The food might not be as good, but the food is pretty good.
Actually, the food you can never go wrong on food in Ukraine,
No, we
and
never,
you just
never,
can't.
we
We never had a bad meal. I
never.
have had bad meals in other countries.
Yeah, me too. But it's that's the problem. And the other thing we look at, there is no moral or tactical or strategic equivalent between what Russia's hitting and what Ukraine is hitting. Ukraine does not indulge its revenge fantasies, right? It hits chemical plants. It hits, you know, techno-military manufacturing facilities. It hits petroleum, oil, and lubricant facilities, refineries, transshipment points, rail marshaling yards, submarines. You can see where this is going. And Putin, I guess he didn't read the book. Look, nobody has ever been bombed into submission, right? It didn't. You galvanized London by the Blitz. And despite Hamburg and Cologne and blankly, Allied terror bombing of German cities, they produced more aircraft in 1945 than they did for the combined total of the rest of the war, right? So killing civilians in their cities, it doesn't win a war. So, one matter, it's good that Putin's wasting his weapons like this, but the other thing is we know some of the people that are being hurt by this, and it's hard to watch.
Yeah, it is hard to watch. And of course, Putin is also unifying the Ukrainian people in a way um, that they might not even have been unified 4 years ago, frankly. But they sure are unified today in their hatred of Russia, which Russians have earned.
Oh God, yeah. And the Russian, the Ukrainians have some unspeakable terms for the Russians. I've never heard anyone call them vatniks, for example.
No, or catsaps.
Saps, yeah.
But the Russians have earned no one's respect,
No.
which is what Putin says they want. But there's only one way to earn that, and that is to stop a genocidal invasion like this of a peaceful neighbor. So back to the F-16s for a minute, Chuck. If Ukraine is deploying F-16s in an air defense role, which they really have to do, what does it tell you about the air defense that Ukraine has available to it? And what are the missions that Ukraine is not deploying F-16s on?
Well, primarily, the Ukrainians appear to be using MiG and Sukhoi aircraft for, I don't even want to say close air support because that doesn't really happen in the way that an American would recognize it. But we do see, especially French hammer bombs, AASM hammer bombs, being deployed by Sukhois and MiGs, and they operate in what an evolving term is called battlefield aerial interdiction, which is air. In my year, it was an airstrike. So rather than close air support, where I'd call in an A-10 and it would go and drop bombs and everything, because I was in contact. These are more deeper strikes, although they come into the picture because it's your frontline forces that will identify a priority target for Ukraine. For example, a drone operations center, a troop concentration point, obvious logistical efforts, et cetera. And I think the F-16s are being held back in what generally would be considered air superiority role. However, they're not mixing it up with Russian fighters back there. It's air superiority to the extent that they're trying to negate these incoming cruise missile threats. The F-16s are not the only things that are being used in Ukraine. There are other fighter platforms coming online. They are flying Mirage fighters as well. I don't want to say good or bad. They do different things better than the F-16 does. But when you are up there and you've got air traffic control vectoring you into these things, then the Mirage fighters and the F-16s and other platforms are going to be really good at shooting down these cruise missiles. I don't know if we can expect Ukraine to have as good a night as it had last night, but it can happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what you pray for, frankly, is for Ukraine air defense to have these impressive nights where, 34 out of 35 cruise and ballistic missiles shot out of the sky. That's a spectacular success for air defense. Shooting down 90% plus or even 85% plus, that is a successful night for air defense. There have been some nights where it's been under 70%, under 60%. And those are nights where either Russia has changed tactics, especially of incoming attack drones, or they have saturated Ukrainian air defense, the skies over Ukraine, in such a way that Ukraine just can't keep up with the attack.
Yeah, and the other thing to think of here, you've got I've got a likely target. It's surrounded by short-range air defense systems, which might be a Gepard. It could be an Iris-T, although they can operate in point defense and larger. And then you have more capable systems expanding out. So think of it as a series of bowls turned upside down on your table. A small one, a teacup around the target, and then a bowl and a bowl and a bowl. And I think the flexibility that the F-16 and other fighter aircraft provide is they can work the margins of those systems. And the other thing that the Swedish 890 gives to these guys is they're plotting these cruise missiles as they come in. And believe me, they always change course and do little weird jinking things. But by the time that cruise missile is getting closer and closer to a likely target, in the Navy we call that the dope. So the target dope on that cruise missile, they know where it's been, they know how fast it's going, they know what it did last, and that informs a Gepard unit, that informs an Iris-T unit, or a Croatel, whatever the air defense system. So it keeps making hits to kill more and more likely. So it's a very complex operation, but like everything else, the Ukrainians are quick learners. And, I wouldn't want to fight them, folks, frankly.
No. The Ukrainians are fast learners. And if we were to give them more tools, or God forbid, all the tools they need to defeat Russia, you would see just how quickly they'd be able to do that. The other consideration in air defense, of course, is the Russians, just over the last 7 to 10 days, have chosen to target Odessa. Now, Odessa is a city of 1 million people. It's a primary seaport and river port for Ukraine, but it's not necessarily as well defended as Kyiv or some other frontline cities. So I imagine Ukraine is probably looking at some rearrangement, redeployment of air defense to give Odessa more protection, but the coming nights will tell us.
Yeah, and I can see this little ripple coming through the information space. The Russians are hitting bridges in the area of Odessa. Don't let anyone tell you this is a precursor to a large Russian amphibious landing on the beaches of Odessa, because, folks, The Russian Marine Corps and their amphibious warfare component, they are out of the game. They lost that chip the day the Moskva sank. And I encourage our Russian listening guests, please put 5,000 or 6,000 Marines in some of your landing ship tanks, and by all means try to get to Odessa. It's over. It is over, which is why the Russians had those huge amphibious forces in the Black Sea. It allowed them to put their thumb down on that section of the globe and project power all along the Black Sea coast. But they're out of that game now, Alan.
Oh, completely. I saw someone make that suggestion that Odessa would be the target of an amphibious assault. And I just, not even I would come up with something as harebrained as that.
Alan, you've been working this beat for a long time. I may not know everything, but I do know amphibious warfare, and you can take me at my word on this one.
Yeah. I think you and I, Chuck, could probably fight off an amphibious assault on Odessa.
And it isn't just, they've got mobile harpoon launchers, right? And Neptune launchers, and come on. And they have incredible, reconnaissance over the Black Sea. And, I'm glad we'll get to mention this. Alan, you had the breaking news on the Russian ASW aircraft. Please tell everybody about that.
Well, this happened a couple of days ago, before the Ukrainians struck the sub in Novorossiysk. So the Russians had one operable anti-submarine air surveillance unit. I'm not sure exactly where it was based, but they had only one. The Ukrainians took it out on the runway. So this is how meticulously Ukraine planned that attack on Novorossiysk, and on that sub, locating that one surveillance unit that could detect a submersible sea baby. They took it out. So they eliminated that possibility altogether.
Yeah, so they took out, in the American Navy, those are called VP, patrol squadrons, and now we use the P8. And so the platform, that Alan is talking about, it was a turboprop anti-submarine warfare aircraft. And surprisingly, the Russians, they think they control a sea, but they've got one, patrol platform. And as you said, Alan, the meticulous planning. So they've got this undersea platform that has to make a very long voyage across the Black Sea, but they are smart enough to know we need to take out that aircraft. And VP aircraft, the lowest tech item on them is a magnetic anomaly detector. And that's the big, long thing that sticks out of the back. And a big piece of metal will, interfere with the magnetic fields of the Earth. And so you fly, and you can fly 10,000 feet, and the mad boom magnetic anomaly detector tells you, hey, there's a great big piece of metal down there. And this prevented the Russians forever there was no possibility for them to, anticipate or detect this attack as it came. And that's, wow.
Yeah. But, that also goes to your planning expertise, Chuck, because, someone in that planning team asked, as, they ran the operation backwards, can Russia detect us? And where's it most likely they're going to detect us before we get to Novorossiysk? And someone had the answer.
Yeah, and you're always looking for those single points of failure, right? What is the one thing that could stop? And there never just is one. So
Right.
we were looking there's always multiple points of failure. It even comes down to one is none. That's what I was taught. So if I were running that up, I would have sent in two. And if they both got in, great. And if one got in to do this, then the other one would lay up, right? So there's a mine that the U.S. Navy has. It's called a captor mine. And it's basically a sleepy torpedo. You drop it, and it goes to the bottom, and it sits there reading the New York Times until you say beep, and you turn it on, and you can preload every surface and submarine. They have specific acoustic signatures. So you could tell this thing, if you hear a cruiser going overhead, take it out. If you hear a freighter, put in destroyer, whatever. So I'm hoping that one of those is sitting in the harbor in Novorossiysk, and maybe a Christmas surprise would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And we still have a couple of nights left for a Christmas surprise. But for this program of indications and warnings on December 23, 2025, and day 1,399 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine, Chuck and I are going to call it a night. Thank all of our viewers, and promise that we will be back right after this upcoming holiday, and we'll be here with you again to say Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava.